Hello, everyone. Welcome to a live dev mentoring session. In those sessions, we help students of the iOS lead essentials to solve any technical challenges they are facing. Today, we are helping our student Suhail. Hello.
Hi, Kaya. Hi, Mike.
Hey, Suhail, welcome back.
For
Thank
joining
you.
us again.
Absolutely.
So today, the topic you chose is how to turn an iOS app idea into specs and test drive the implementation. Can you explain a little bit this challenge you have?
So, having kind of gone through the program and a few sections of it multiple times, one of the early things that we learn about is essentially that having good specs is what's one of the things that's going to help us get towards a good architecture and a good design. So, in the program, we kind of do make kind of BDD specs, and we start with a kind of user story that's there and see about kind of turning that into something. So, and I think that the idea there is that, let's say within a company, you're going to get the analysts and people essentially giving you those things. And then you as the developer, the idea is make sure you've got good communication, go back and forward and make sure that you can turn it into something that's essentially going to be actionable and you can make your tests. In my case, when I'm working on my own kind of side project or something like that, I'm kind of on both sides of it, and I think that's where I'm struggling a little bit. Where it's like I've got the idea in my mind of where I want it to get, and then usually what will happen is I'll just maybe start coding something or building something. But I just wanted to kind of get a bit better at turning that idea into actual kind of specs, user stories, acceptance criteria, the BDD specs, and essentially get it to a point where it's like, okay, now I have an idea of the kind of tests that I want to write, so I can test drive the implementation.
Okay. So it's very important before coding, be clear with requirements, right? Have clear requirements. Have clear requirements. Otherwise, we start coding and we get lost. We don't know where we're done, when we are done, what we should do. You can code for days and days and days and get nowhere, right? You just keep building stuff and you never end. So before coding, have clear requirements. That's very, very important. In the program, we teach that even before opening Xcode, making sure that you have clear specs, what you're going to do, like technical specs, design specs, if there's any kind of UI, because this is going to help you be more informed about making architectural decisions, design decisions, project decisions, and I'm going to use modules, and I'm going to use SwiftUI, I'm going to use, it's going to help you make decisions. Otherwise, you're paralyzed. I need to build an app, and you have an idea. And like, there's so many decisions you need to make. You get paralyzed if you don't have clear, like a scope, So when starting with an app, is this an app that you are building? You are coming up with the requirements, or is this something that someone is telling you what to do?
So this is me coming up with the requirements, the app idea, everything. So it's just me by myself.
Okay. So you have a bunch of ideas and you need to convert them into deliverable chunks of code. You can call it like V1, V2, V3, but it must have like a set of features you want to implement. And you put it into a scope and say, okay, when all those features are implemented, it's done. I'm going to release. And ideally, this should be very, very small scopes. Small scopes. You're always delivering something. Otherwise, you can work for 6 months, never ship anything to your clients, right? It never ends. It can work forever. Literally, you can work forever and never release. So release is important. Releasing is important. Release often to get feedback. The idea is you have an idea or have like many ideas. Maybe it's going to take you 5 years to implement everything.
Yeah.
But can you release something next week? Try to aim, can I release something in 2 weeks? Short cycles. Can I release something in the next 2 weeks? Set a time frame. Okay, in 2 weeks. Come up with a set of features of I can release this in 2 weeks, and that's V1. release it. And then you come up with a set of features that you can release in the next 2 weeks. That's V2 and V3, and so on. If you're working in a team, this works very well. If you're working alone, this works very well. Always having short scope of things you have to do, because it's very common as well. You're working in a company and they have business analysts and they come with all these ideas, all this backlog, gigantic backlog on Jira. Help them organize and say, okay, let's try to box these into 2 weeks chunks and keep releasing features and keep getting feedback from our customers. Releasing is important. The sooner you release, the sooner you get feedback and you can improve. Because maybe you have an idea, oh, this is what people would like in this app. You build it and actually they start asking you to do other features that you didn't even think about. But if you waited for 6 months to implement everything, you would deliver something they didn't want, right? So release something very basic in the beginning and keep improving it based on feedback and based on your ideas as well. So this is very important. Small scope, release often in short cycles. Every 2 weeks, update the app in the App Store with a new release, either with bug fixes or with improvements or new features. So this is going to guide you on how to organize your work. What can I fit in 2 weeks? And then you can use something like Trello, any kind of checklist style, say, and then you will create a board on Trello, for example, or whatever software you want to use, and you create a list, a V1 list, and then task 1, task 2, task 3, and so on. Then a V2 list, V1 list, task 1, task 2. More tasks you add here, the longer it's going to take you to release. So keep the tasks short, only a few.
3 is a good number.
All the ideas you have and you didn't fit yet in a specific list, you create a backlog list. You keep all your ideas. Create a backlog list and keep all your ideas there. Every idea is in one card. And when you close in the scope for V1, you drag some things into V1. When it's done, that's it. You archive that list. Start working on V2. Drag some things from the backlog into V2. Every time you are coding, an idea comes, oh, I could implement this thing. Don't add it to V1. It was not there. Write a card and keep in the backlog. Immediately when you have an idea, you put in the backlog. Then you free your mind to focus on the task at hand. What I see people failing a lot is they start having ideas and they don't write it down. And they keep overloading their brains with trying to keep that in memory and still doing their tasks. And then the productivity goes down. Their stress levels go up. Their fatigue, they reach fatigue sooner because they're trying to do too many things. So if you have a backlog, you just have an idea, put it there. Sometimes you're doing task 1 and you find out that, oh, it's harder than what I thought. And I have to do this, and that. There needs to be some validation here. I need to do some logging with Google. Okay, start adding a checklist inside the tasks. Right, so inside a card, you add a checklist of things you need to do. As you're coding, oh, I need to do something here. Write it down in the checklist and carry on with your work. Always free your mind to focus on the task at hand. That's pretty much the process. Have a backlog with all the ideas, because there'll be loads of ideas. Then you create short iterations, releasable features. 2 weeks would be ideal, but until you get to 2 weeks, maybe, you're going to have to, you will have a 2 weeks idea, but maybe it's going to take 3 weeks. But then you start learning more about your capacity of delivering features, and then you adjust. And keep releasing. Every time you have something releasable, you have a continuous integration, continuous development, continuous deployment, automation. Automate, of course. Like maybe your first thing is to create all the automation. V0, set up automations. So you merge to master, it already sends a binary to the App Store. Then it's just a choice if you're going to release it or not. So set up automations because then you're going to be more productive. Otherwise, you're going to waste another 2 weeks just uploading stuff to the App Store and dealing with certificates, with provisioning profiles.
Yeah.
So write down your ideas into cards. It doesn't even need to be very detailed. You just put an idea there, like just one phrase, like a card title, like 3 words. And then you dive deep and create checklists and tasks out of it when you are moving into a releasable chunk of work here, another list. So this is a process you can use to always be delivering features instead of working for 6 months and not having anything in the App Store. So your goal is for the next, let's say, maximum 4 weeks to have something in the App Store. Can you do that?
Yeah,
Even if it's very basic, very, very, very basic. Doesn't matter. It doesn't need to sync. It doesn't need to have caching. Just have something working in the App Store.
Yeah, I think I can do that. I think, a lot of what you said is it's really helpful, actually. You were saying that sometimes when you're coding, then suddenly another idea comes to your mind. And if you don't write it down, you start working on that, you go off on a tangent, and then you also don't get any feedback for yourself because you're not seeing anything. And that's also quite demotivating. So I think in the past, actually, I did that with the first app I was working on. I kept doing that. I kept kind of going this way, that way, and it was taking so long to get anything like deliverable in the App Store. Then I took a break from it, worked on something else separately, just really simple, and then I think I got that in the App Store in 2 or 3 weeks, and that the feeling from that actually pushed me to then finish the other one. So
Yes.
yeah, so I think that's really helpful, actually, and that is my idea. That is the plan, actually. Try and get a very small kind of MVP in the App Store within the month, 2 to 4 weeks at the most. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so that's the challenge. Until the end of November now, this app should be in the App Store. I'm gonna hold you accountable there in the community, okay? But very, very basic, like just have something working, like the simplest feature just to get it moving.
Yeah, just one thing to mention here, why, in my opinion, of course, like is this happening, is because like these ideas, these thoughts that we have are very abstract, and this process is all about making these abstractions very, very concrete. So we do not assume anything, because if you assume, like, there is a cognitive load on this thing, and you don't know what to do. Like you assume you're supposed to do something, or you assume that it should look like whatever version that you're making, but it's not concrete. You don't know. So like you need to allocate resources for that to happen. So this is a fantastic process for getting down to it, like making it happen. And by the way, this is a theme in overall, like software engineering. Like, for example, test-driven development is, if you think about it, kind of the same thing. It's like you start with a hypothesis, and then you end up validating that hypothesis, and while doing that, you're producing your production code as well. So getting from this abstract to the concrete, it is what needs to be done. And there are ways that you can do that, right? This is a fantastic way, and it work, like for us, has been working for I don't know how many years now. So this is what we teach as well. Yeah, that's it.
That's the hard part.
Yeah,
coming from this abstract idea to concrete implementation without getting distracted.
Yes.
With things, because maybe you have an idea. I'm gonna write a simple app here that does X, and you start doing it. Oh, it would be nice if you had caching, and then you immediately start doing this caching and adding core data and dealing with complexities of the framework now, and then start having threading issues, and then there's a crash. And now 3 weeks passed, and you're stuck into something. You still haven't released the feature because you're just now dealing with framework complexities, right? And you also will design your code in a way that say, okay, I want to add caching, but it's not in my V1 scope. Thus, I'm going to design my code in a way that is going to be easier to add caching later in V2. But I will release V1 without caching. And you release the app in 2 weeks, right? And then move on. In V2, there will be caching. V3, there will be syncing with Firebase. In V3, there will be something else. It's a gradual process. And you're always moving. You never you never stop because we feel like, no, this is going to be slow because, we need to do things in every 2 weeks. No, it actually faster than trying to do everything at once. And there's always progress, which keep us motivated. We lose motivation very quickly when we work for 6 months with nothing concrete to show, to deliver, no feedback, right? But if we keep improving and always releasing and getting feedback, we stay motivated to do it.
I mean, you mentioned, Suhail, that you coded a simple app, in a matter of days, then you shipped it and you were happy. Like, I don't think it was simple, like, I think what happened was that you had a concrete idea of what you need to build, and when you do that, you can actually build it fast and you can ship it fast and get feedback and, like have this sense of accomplishment. So that's the difference there, like it doesn't matter, like complex ideas, if you break them down, if you understand them, like they stop being complex. They're just tasks like these that Caio has listed there. So that's the goal, like.
Yeah, I know what you mean because it's the scope was I made sure the scope was quite small for that, and I just focused on that, and like even that I did the persistence, I did that test driven as well in that app as well, but it's just I just only focused on a very small kind of thing, just literally do the task they needed to do, and then I just shipped it.
Yeah.
Also, another thing that can get you stuck is the design specs. Because if you're not a designer, I'm not. So I'm not good at design. I know how to code things, but design, I prefer to hire a designer or work with a designer to do things. So I'm just lucky that iOS, the default things already look good, So if I'm just using the default, following the human interface guidelines, it will look good. It's not going to be anything custom and different, but it's going to work well. When people are used to that user interface, it's going to work well. So don't waste a lot of time coming with a design if you're not a designer. Use the default toggles, the default buttons and labels, Don't waste a lot of time with that, especially at the beginning. And then you can hire someone, maybe a designer. If the app starts working well and you start having a lot of customers, then you can hire a designer to help you. But at first, use the default things. Already it's going to look good. If you're following the human interface guidelines, fantastic. Don't create custom navigation controllers. No, use what the platform gives you, right? It already is going to look good. And it doesn't even need to look good in V1. It's also, the design is also a feature, right? That you can keep improving.
Yeah.
It needs to be functional, it needs to work, it needs to solve a problem that people have, and you keep iterating and improving it. Don't get stuck.
Yeah. And another thing that you mentioned, you mentioned like BTD specs, like these scenarios and all that stuff. Perhaps they're not needed in this case. Like if you're working alone, perhaps they're not the best tool to break things down. Like I don't know. These are usually tools that you use in order to communicate to more than one people, in the team, your ideas, and across many departments as well of a company, not just the engineering one. So you don't have to, implement those, right? Like what you need to do is just have a process that works for you, and might be just like a Trello board that with a well-defined board structure and card structure and description, in each card, and then just test drive your components from there. You don't need these things.
This idea of stories and use cases, they are usually meant to be used in a team of people that will implement something that you need to synchronize everyone, in the same, to achieve the same goal at the end. So you have a team and you create a story of something that you want to achieve for the customer, and you will sit down in a meeting and discuss it, and there will be technical people, there will be business people, there will be people saying this is what we want the customers to do. The technical people would say this is possible or not based on our current infrastructure, our current systems. Yeah, we can do this, no, we can do that. And you have these conversations that will, as a team, come up with solutions. But if you're working alone, you don't need to write these very detailed documentation things, because you are working alone and you kind of understand what you're building. But it's different in a team, because now we have maybe 20 people, involved into something, and communication now, it's very, very, very important. It needs to be very detailed, to be very clear. Otherwise, you'll get something different than what they want at the end, right? But if you're working alone, you don't need to do this kind of very detailed stories and use cases. A Trello board should be enough.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess it's more about having that kind of shared terminology and that shared kind of language that you can use, that essentially there aren't any ambiguities. Everybody understands what they means, what each other means. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense, actually.
Yeah.
You can get away without tech specs and design specs when you're working alone. But when you start working in a team, then you need those. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so which app idea do you have? Let's go to more concrete now.
So there's a couple, but I think that the main one that's a little bit important in the sense that what I need it for. So at home, my son is homeschooled, and one of the things that I'm focusing on the kind of Arabic literacy side, and my wife does more of the English. And so the thing is, I think with kids, sometimes it's hard to get them to, especially at home, just sit down and learn. Whereas when it's on the iPad, when it's on the phone, then it's a lot easier. So I wanted to build like an Arabic, basically an app to help him learn how to read Arabic. And the primary objective of that is so that he can read books, so that he can read stories and things like that in the Arabic language. In terms of so he understands Arabic already. That's there as a language that I speak with him at home. But I just need him to be able to read for himself. And so that was the app idea I had, essentially. And ideally an iPad app, but with iPhone version as well, which would probably, again, be something I'd push to a later scope. But just to teach him how to read the letters and read words.
Okay, so the app idea is to learn Arabic. Right? An app that will help you learn the grammar and also pronunciation.
So this would just be reading, being able to read and pronounce, I'd say. So in terms of the actual, it might sound strange, but it's quite normal, especially with Muslims, that a lot of children, they learn how to read Arabic without understanding the language, just because of our prayers and things like that. So this is how I learned as a child. Everyone learns, you're about maybe 5 years old or so, you just learn how to read. So it's just like reading Latin script, but not understanding what it means. It'll be the same. And the difference with my son is that he'll understand. So it's just actually about how to read and oralize the script.
Right. So this is the intent of the app.
Yeah.
What is this app about? It's to teach people how to read and pronounce Arabic. Even if you don't understand it, you'll be able to pronounce the words.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
And how will this app achieve that? Now we started looking deeper into the app. Okay, this is the main goal, right? Someone that downloads this app and uses it, they should learn how to read and pronounce Arabic, right? That's it. Now, how will the app help them achieve that? What is the methodology behind it?
So because I'm primarily targeting children, I was thinking of it being with audio. So for example, they'll see the letter and then there will be an audio of how to pronounce it. Because I know some apps, for example, use transliteration in like an English script or in Latin script, for example. I don't think that wouldn't be suitable for children if they can't already read a language. So that's what the main idea I was thinking is there'd be audio.
Okay, so you listen to an audio and you select an option that is written down.
Yeah, so essentially, I mean, my initial idea is pretty much just like a flashcard type system where you see the letter and the pronunciation is said out loud for you, and then you essentially go through all of the letters in this way. And there needs to, there needs to be some kind of testing system of, okay, which, like, for example, maybe there's 3 cards and then the audio says one, letter or something, and then the child would have to choose the right one. But I kind of put even that testing element in a kind of version 1.1. I was thinking initially just having even all of the letters, how they're pronounced, just that much would probably be maybe a good minimum viable product, just so that it's more likely to be releasable within 2 to 3 weeks. I think the testing side of it might bring a bit more complication.
Okay.
Yeah.
So V1 would be a list of letter cards, and let's say you tap on it, it makes the sound.
Oh yeah, that would be even
Right.
easier than yeah.
Very easy. Let's
Yeah.
go very easy. Okay, we have a list of cards. Each card represents a letter. For example, for the English, it would be like you tap on it, say A, B, C, D, right?
Exactly, yeah.
That's it. It's not even a test. It's not even giving you a score or anything. The simplest you can do right now, let's say you start progressing, right? As you start learning the sounds, then you start having challenges. You hear the sound and you need to select the card, but that's a different mode inside the app. The easy one, like the first mode, you just download the app, that's it. You see a list of cards. Each card represents a letter. Tapping on the letter to play on audio. Start there. Can you release this in 2 weeks?
Yes.
Right? Just make some cards that could be like a collection view with 3 cards per row.
Yeah.
Something simple, right? So imagine a UI like this. Let's see. You have the app and you have rows. Each row has 3 cards, like A, B. You can even have actual design specs like this. It doesn't need to look nice, it could be just something like this.
That is pretty much how my design specs are.
And that's it.
Yeah.
Tap on it. It's gonna say A, B, C. That's it. That's V1.
Right.
So that's how we'd come up with the requirements. Is something quick I can do in 1 week and release it. And then already have some other ideas for V2 and V3 and V4 and keep implementing it. Start getting feedback. You probably will share this app with friends, right?
Yeah.
That will use it and they will ask, how it would be nice if you had this. Very nice. Okay, I think I can do this in V4, and keep iterating and improving it.
Yeah. Or quizzes, maybe, like keeping score and challenging. I don't know. Like, possibilities are endless with an iPhone.
So let's name this feature here. What would be this feature? The
Like alphabet or something like that.
Yeah, maybe something like that. The alphabet itself.
alphabet sounds. That's it. The alphabet sounds feature. So list of letter cards. Each card represents a letter. Tapping on the letter will play on audio. That's it. That's the first thing you need. Now, turning these into more technical requirements here, you can start thinking about what comes to your mind. You say, okay, how would you implement this? I want to understand how you think about like a requirement and translating it to code, because everyone has their own process. So I'm curious.
So, excuse me. One of the things that I get stuck on a little bit actually is the TDD when it comes to the user interface side of things. So I'm not sure how I would do this test driven, to be honest with you. But if I were, thinking about building this, I think what you said, a collection view sounds, like it'd be quite an easy way of doing that. So my mind, I think, as you said, it's going in all different kind of areas. I'm thinking about there's the letters themselves, thinking about okay, there's a collection view, it's going to get that data of the letters. Where's that going to come from? Most likely for now, that's just going to be a file that's just, embedded in the application. I don't see any need, definitely not at this stage, for there to be any kind of remote downloading of anything. And then
So
again,
audio will be bundled in the app,
yeah.
so offline.
Yeah, same with, I think, yeah. So I'm thinking of even just the letters themselves. Let's just call them ABC for now. Even that coming, I think, would be bundled within the app as well, most likely.
Will be
I mean,
hard-coded, right?
Yeah.
It can be a
Oh,
list of letters.
Yeah.
And they will be ordered
Yeah.
or random. Like, is it better to be ordered?
So I think I don't think at this stage it necessarily matters, because when it comes to the kind of, let's say, the pedagogy side of things, or would be the best kind of way of teaching Arabic, like, as in Arabic's got kind of some unique considerations, because, for example, all of the letters are consonants. There are no voweled letters in the Arabic language, and then vowels are additionally added onto the letters. So I know that there are different approaches when it comes to teaching Arabic. So I think at this stage, it wouldn't really matter if I did a kind of traditional, just the letter names. But normally, even in English nowadays, they like to do phonics-based approach. I've seen this in Arabic as well now. They're doing phonics-based approaches. So I think the order is somewhat arbitrary, as in, I don't think it would matter too much if I did it ordered or jumbled up even.
Okay, so there will be no syncing. Everything will be offline. Audios will be bundled in the app. The letters will be hard-coded in the app. So this is going to speed up a lot your development. Maybe in the future you can start adding some web services if needed. But again, V1, MVP.
Yeah.
That's it. So, okay, no syncing. So that's going to be easier. Audio, do you have all these audio files? I recommend you compress them. So, maybe MP3, check a lower quality that still keeps good qualities, just so your app is not very large, because
Yeah.
audio files, maybe an audio file could be like 50 megabytes each, and
Wow. Yeah, so with the audio, most likely I was just going to record myself. That was
yeah,
what's going to happen. Yeah.
compress it, maybe MP3. The letters, just create a list of letters in an array, maybe something like that, whatever makes sense. And then the UI, you thinking UI kit?
Yes, UI kit.
Okay, so UI collection view. You're thinking more technical side of things, right?
Yeah. And how the audio is going to be reproduced. You're going to need the AV foundation, probably, the player.
Yeah. So I've worked with it a long time ago, just more when I was just kind of learning Swift. I have played around with audio as well. I've actually a long time ago done something like this, but then it didn't go anywhere, if that makes sense. So I did actually do some of this work where, I had audio recordings, playing them and things like that. I had a flashcard as well. But it was probably about, I don't know, it was before COVID, actually. That's how I can reference it. So it was before
Right.
2020. So,
Okay.
but yeah, AV Foundation, all of that. Those are the things I'll probably be looking into.
All right, so we have some idea of the feature we want to implement. Hey, you see, it didn't take a long time to come up with some basic, okay, this is the idea we want. This is kind of the technical side of things. Everything will be offline, which is easier. Do we want at some point to have some kind of syncing coming from a backend or not?
So I think an eventual version of this app would, even if it's not exactly. Yeah, so look, I think that there are two different things I'm thinking of. One is I'm thinking that this should work for multiple children, so they should within a household, so they should have their own kind of progress within it. At the moment, it's just a list of letters, obviously, but eventually there's going to be stages or levels that of reading, whole words, compounds, sentences, and it should be able to track where each child is. And at the same time, I'm thinking that that kind of, let's say, lessons that should be content that is delivered over the network, because that way I can, from the backend side, add new content. So for example, if it ever became like a subscription based app, then I can release things like, even stories. I can write stories and then release them, things like that. So, but again, that is, I think, definitely very far down the line at the moment.
Yeah.
So it's important to have this idea of the backlog, because having an idea of what you want to achieve when you are implementing V1, V2, V3, even though you're not doing those tasks yet, you can already start designing your app, facilitating those things to be added down the line. For example, if you just have a global user singleton that is very common, every application you get out there, they use this. It's going to be very hard to have multi-user support, like, having multiple users in the application, because it's a singleton. You're going to have to mutate the singleton when someone switches app and refreshes all the UI. So there are other strategies for when you have multiple users that you can already start implementing, already, avoid the singleton user and start avoiding the shared user, for example. Now, if you want to have the lessons delivered from a web, it doesn't change V1, so you don't need to make any different decisions here for it. If you want to have subscriptions, also doesn't change anything here. So, okay. And you say you have issues test driving the user interface, right? You don't know where to start.
Yeah, that's right. I've for both of the apps that I've kind of got in the App Store, when it came to the so I made the kind of UI test target and then put nothing in it. So that's what happened both times. It's like, okay, I know that this is what I'm supposed to do, and I'm supposed to definitely test drive this, but it's just I don't know why it hasn't clicked so much. Like with the networking, with the kind of persistence, those things, it made more sense. I think it's just maybe because of the fact that design and that side of things, even user interface, it's not the best thing in my mind. For me, logic and the kind of those kind of algorithmic things, they make sense. Or if you're testing, so I was recently actually watching one of the mentoring sessions, the where you kind of did a pair programming exercise, and it was on FizzBuzz and it was test driven. Like that makes a lot of sense to me. I can understand that because there's some very clear kind of inputs and outputs. But then when it comes to test driving the user interface and the snapshot testing, that stuff in the program made sense to me. Like, okay, I understand. We're looking at what's on the screen, where it is. We want to make sure that we don't kind of regress in another version. But then it's just the building that interface programmatically. Ideally, is what I'm most comfortable with, and but kind of test driving it. That's where I just get a bit stuck on how to really go about it.
Okay.
So when you have something like FizzBuzz and you're writing unit tests, you have like an input, you pass to a function, the function returns something, and you assert output is what you expect, right? That's simple tests. You give an input to a function, you get an output, and you assert that it's what you expected. Usually with user interface is different, right? Because you actually perform an action,
So
and
there's
you
an
will
event.
assert the side effect.
Yeah.
Was it what you expected? For example, when I tap this button, now the presentation changed. A model was presented. When I tap this button, this label changed. When I tap this button, there's been a navigation, right? So there is it returns void when you perform an action.
Yes.
It doesn't return an output that you will directly assert, right? It returns void, and then you need to assert a side effect that happened in the user interface. Something outside the scope of that function changed, right? It's a side effect. Like a label changed the text. An audio was played. I tap, perform an action. I tap on a cell, and I need to assert that an audio was played on the device, right?
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
That's it. Performed.
There's an event that happened, like a view loaded. So
Or a view was removed. A cell was moved. There's a side effect outside that scope. And that's the difference. You have these two types of input that returns an output. Then you just assert the output is what you expected. UI, usually you perform an action that returns void, and then you need to assert a side effect that is expected. It's a small shift. Yeah.
You still have the same structure for the test, given, when, then. Doesn't matter, like if you have like a pure function, given the input, when you call that function, then you have the output, right? It's exactly the same thing here, but you have more parts participating in the whole testing of your component, right? That's the thing with the side effect.
Yes. So I think we could start writing some tests here. Let's see. Let's create a project, iOS application. Okay. Let's call it, I don't know, entering. So you want UIKit.
Yes.
Swift, include tests? Yes.
Yes.
All right. So create a new project, I already get an application target because it's an iOS application project template I used, a testing target, and a UI test target. Now, even though we're testing UI here, we're talking about test driving the UI, I wouldn't use UI tests. UI tests are different kinds of tests. They actually run an application and you're going to interact with it by tapping buttons directly on the application. It runs as a separate process, so it's very slow. It needs to load the app and then load the separate process that will interact with the application. It needs to wait for buttons to exist and to click into navigation animations. It's very slow. So as much as possible, I avoid using UI tests and try to default to the basic XC test style of perform an action, test the side effect of the user interface. So even remove this UI test target here because it will take a long time to run. So usually I create a new project, I already delete the UI test target and I add it later if needed. Maybe there's a feature that I cannot test with the XC test and I need that extra thing, and then I will think about UI tests, but I will avoid it as much as possible. I will edit the scheme to remove this target now. Oh, okay, so now we have only our test targets here. Let's run the test. Now we need to think that test driving a UI here will be test driving, for example, a view controller. We'll be test driving the logic of this view controller, not how it looks like. Yeah. We're not going to be test driving the frames of a cell. We're not going to test drive the bounds. Is it within bounds? Like, is it 100 pixels wide and 50 tall? No, we're not going to test the frames. We're not going to test user interface, how it looks like. Because for this, we have storyboards, we have snapshot tests, we have other things we could use. In SwiftUI, we have previews, right? Because the idea we test is that initially fast feedback. As you writing the code, you get immediate feedback on what you're doing. And also, a second important thing that unit tests give you is the confidence of regressions, and not introducing regressions. Because now you have automatic checks that will prevent things from breaking. If you make a change that breaks something that was expected, the test will fail. So previews, for example, it gives you the first thing. It gives you fast feedback on the user interface, but doesn't give you the second thing. It doesn't give you the fast feedback if something broke, if something changed. That's why we would think about snapshot tests, about when you want to test how things look like, to have this automatic checks for regressions. Right, so we need a mix of strategies with SwiftUI. With UIKit, we can test pretty much everything, the logic of a view controller, for example, and we can add some snapshot tests as well to get any regressions on, maybe a label, you change a constraint, and now a label is breaking when it shouldn't, it's overlapping another view. You would get this with a snapshot test. Otherwise, you need to be running the app all the time and clicking on buttons manually, and that's going to take a long time.
That's slow, yes.
Yeah. I think especially when the app if it gets really, really big and it's even slow to build and to run it as well. So working on things like that can be quite
Yeah.
painful as well.
Yes. Just having problem with Xcode here. It's stuck.
We try the other simulator.
Oh, it's trying to run things in parallel with clones. No, I don't want to run in parallel. It actually makes things slower. Let's see. Building. Okay, now it's working.
Okay.
Okay. So we create a project. We get a test target already empty, just with some commented out code that we don't need. So remember, testing the user interface, perform an action, you insert a side effect. So we can think about some test cases here. What will be the first test case? The simplest one. Remember, always start from the simplest test case.
So if we're talking about the list of letters, the letters are there.
Yeah, but what is the simplest? Even simpler than that.
Simpler than that? I don't know if I'm thinking not simply, but simpler than that is that there is no audio playing when the screen is there because nobody's tapped on anything.
Yeah, but now we think about audio, we think about other things. Let's say if we have an empty list of letters, it renders nothing, right? Like that's the basic one.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, so no letters, there should be nothing on the screen, basically.
Yeah, because we can think,
Yeah.
no, the view controller will have the hard-coded data, or we're going to pass the data to the view controller.
Right.
It's a decision we need to make now, right? So we're saying that the letters will be hard-coded in the app. But where would it be hard-coded? Inside the view controller? Or is this some data we pass to the view controller? This is the kind of decision we start making now as we are designing our system.
Yeah, no, it makes sense that we'd be passing it into the view controller.
Right.
Okay.
So our first test, let's say we have a system under test, which is a letters view controller, for example, right? So test, empty. And we can pass here letters, for example. We pass an empty array,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
Already have a build error, so we need to create a class here. I'm going to create it here in the test target, but this is production code. I'm just creating here, so I don't need to be switching files. Okay?
Yeah.
A lot of people, oh, you're writing test code, test code. No, this is production code. And it needs an initializer. Okay. Let's create a convenience initializer with letters. An array of something. Just to get compiling, let's use a string, anything. Need to give it a type. Could be any if you want. Okay. Self-init. Cool. So this is the creation. What is the action? Remember. So this is arrange, act, insert. Arrange or given a scenario when something happens, then you assert something.
So I think the act in this case would just be that load view, as in when the view is loaded, or load view if needed.
Load view if needed.
That's it.
And what is the assertion? What is the expectation here?
So the expectation here, we said that there's nothing, there are no letters on the screen, there's nothing on the screen. But I don't know, does that mean we just check like if there's some kind of internal property, like letters is an empty array or something like that?
No, we can check exactly the let's say if there's a table view, for example, we can
Right.
check the number of rows should be 0,
Oh, yes.
right? This is one way of doing it. Another compilation error, so you just make this into a UI table view controller, for example, or a UI collection controller, whatever makes sense to your case.
Yeah.
Right, so if empty, you have a table view with nothing in it. That's the simplest test case just to start, because you want always the simplest test case to start. Otherwise, you get stuck as well, writing a test for too long, and it's going to be super complicated. You're going to have to add a bunch of mocks and stuff. It's like, no, let's start simple. And the good thing about this is that these letters now can come from anywhere. These letters could come from a backend server, from a hard-coded list embedded in the app, from a database. It doesn't matter. The view controller doesn't care about the provenance of the letter. Where did these letters come from? It doesn't matter. The UI can be simple enough that you just pass data to it and will render on the screen.
Yes.
That's it. And then your UI is simple, it's simple to test. The same thing, if this was a Swift UI letters view, same thing. You're not going to pass a view model with a service for the, no, you pass the data, a list of letters, and ask, hey, Swift UI, render this list of letters. How you get this data, it's another concern. You're going to write unit tests as well for it, but in a separate layer, and then we compose them. We compose this web service or this hard-coded list of letters and inject it into our views. This way our views are simple and easy to test.
Just one question on this. With this test case, I expect that this will pass, but how would we have seen an initial failing test? I mean, I know that during the process we had the build failure is also considered a failing test, but when we got to the end of this with the assertion at the end, I think this should pass, right?
Yeah.
Yes, you can force it.
Right.
Number of rows.
Number of rows.
Yeah.
Can return 1. I will also disable the debugger to make this faster, because we don't need debugger here, because the test gives us feedback. Oh, failed. Okay.
Right.
1 is not equal to 0. Sometimes we are testing something that is already implemented, like by default, it's already 0, right? So you want to force a failure just to make sure that this test would fail in case it was returning the wrong data. If you run a test and it passes, be concerned. Maybe I'm not testing what I expect. Maybe I'm not testing the right thing. Maybe this test will never fail, so does it not testing anything, right? So, okay, we saw a failing test, now we saw it passing. I'm going to remove these comments because you don't need them. You just keep them in your mind. You want these kind of checks. And then, okay, test 1 item. You pass here A. And you expect number of rows to be 1.
Right.
For example, and you start doing it like this. So it can be a private var letters. It starts as empty, let's say. And then you can say letters dot count. But again, for that, you can see a failing test. Make it pass. And so on. Right? The test-driven implementation of the data source. It's very simple. It's very quick. You start extracting things now. For example, I don't want my test to be coupled with table view. What if I want to later use a collection view here? Right? Can start creating some helpers here. Private extension of our letters view controller. And you have a tiny DSL here, like number of letters. We can extract this here. Or we could just use number of letters.
All right.
Now you can change this to be a collection view, to be whatever, you know. Could even refactor it to be a hosting controller for a SwiftUI view that then extracts whatever data is in there. It doesn't matter for the test. As long as it's returning the number of letters there, fantastic. And then you start testing, actually, they rendered a card cell with the content of this letter. And then you can test when you click on a letter, what happens, right? Say, okay, is letter any? You start thinking about types now. Because the test is like, you want to do the minimum test to make it pass, but then you're going to make decisions that makes you feel weird, like, any is not good. I want a type here, right? And that's the discovery process. Okay, I need a model here. What should this model be like?
Yeah.
Right? Should this model be like? I say, this should be what, a string? Should it actually be a struct called letter, with more properties and so on?
Right.
And to protect my test from these changes, like, I'm using a string here just because it was the simplest things to do, but later it could be something else. So just to protect my test from breaking changes in the future, I'm going to create a private function make letter, and we pass here a string. This will return right now a string, for example. So here it's a make letter. For now, we just return the string. But if in the future we want this to actually be a model, like string letter with a string, and maybe an action, like for playing the audio, right? Like it could be a closure. Now, I can literally just change this here into return a letter without breaking the test. And here, play, whatever. It doesn't matter here. So now this could be a letter, for example. So you are able to refactor your code without breaking the tests. That's the goal. Having tests that doesn't prevent refactoring. It supports refactoring.
Yes.
You can test that when you select, for example, test selection, for example. Remember, you have an action, you perform an action, and then you assert a side effect, right? And then you can check that you load the view, and then you select letter at index 1, for example, and then, or index 0. And then you expect maybe the letter dot was played equals true,
Right.
and start adding the side effects of performing an action, because it returns void, right? Those things return void, and
Yes.
so on. Like that's the idea. You have the things you need to do, the specs here, list of letters. Okay, I'm going to test drive rendering the list of letters. Each card represents a letter, whatever that means. You're going to define your models. You're going to define your user interface for that. Tapping on the letter will play an audio. So you're going to test that when you tap on it, an audio was played, which in this case is just calling a function. Now, your view controller doesn't need to know where the data came from. So it doesn't need to have a web service that will download something or get a hard-coded list. You just inject into it. And maybe you already designed your model to have a play function that you just call play. Now, the view controller also doesn't need to know about AV audio, AV foundation, and you know how to load an audio from the bundle and run it. No, this can be injected as well. Then your user interface is very, very simple to test. And you keep building on top of it, right? So this is the outside-in approach, right? We're going from the user interface. We design first the user interface, test drive it, and start implementing the rest of the system. And there's also the inside-out approach, where you start actually building the core of your application, the domain, and then the web service, and then you get to the UI, to the outer layers. So you can go both ways, both work. But here we're test driving what the user interface needs, and then we build on top of it web services, databases, AV foundation, playing audio, playing video, whatever you need. But that's the idea of test driving the interface. Keep the user interface as simple as possible. So it's easy to test. You decouple it from the provenance of the data, which means it can now come from multiple sources.
Right.
So there's a lot of benefits starting from the user interface. It's also when working in a team, like start from the user interface. Even though the web services are not ready, you can still run your app and show the user interface to your boss, to a business analyst, to your team members, and they can already interact with it. Even though there's no database yet, there's no backend service, it's still interactable.
Right.
And fake all those services until it's ready, right?
Yeah.
So does it make sense, the process of test driving from the UI perspective?
Yeah, it does make a lot of sense. I mean, it's ironic to say that this is pretty much like the same in the program, but I think for some reason it clicked more here. If that makes sense. I mean, I know you've obviously shown all of these things, and I've gone through the UI module probably about 3 times, but but I don't know what it is. It's just sometimes I think reminder is beneficial, isn't it? Hearing it again, seeing it again, and then even though it's not drastically different, but a different kind of app or a different idea, it just helped drive it in a little bit more. So I think that does give me a good kind of starting point for the user interface of how to kind of do that.
Yeah, start from here, and you probably will get stuck trying to test something. The UI kit, it has some gotchas there. You need to know how to deal with, like how to simulate a button press. We have this in the lectures, but if you want an answer quick as well, go on Slack and ask a question. Like, I'm pretty sure people help you very quickly.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's it. Keep your components simple. You have a complex system. Create very, very simple components, many of them, and compose them to do the hard thing, to the complex thing. Any complex system can be broken down into small units. They're simple. But in composition, they do something complex. Or you can write one global class that does everything and no one can maintain. It's a choice.
Exactly, it is.
And small interactions, small scopes at a time. So your goal is to get this done by the end of the month. It should be in the App Store. And you're going to post there in the community when it's done. Okay?
Yes, I'll do that.
Simple user interface, simple implementation. You record the audio. Don't waste time trying to find audios on the internet. Simple. Don't get stuck. And then you go from there. V1, go to V2, and so on. Any idea that comes as you're implementing things, put in the backlog. Don't increase your scope for the release. Okay? Does this answer your initial questions?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's also because I wasn't thinking, on the BDD specs model, I wasn't thinking of that in the context of, collaboration, even though that's the whole point. The whole point of it is communication. So I get it. It's weird. It's almost like I'm trying to figure out how to communicate with my own head, if that makes sense. So, and I think just as you said, having, Trello is a nice and easy solution. Having that kind of process, writing those things down. I mean, at the moment, I just kind of use my notes app, which is not really great. And then I do write, okay, all these things, and I kind of move them around. But I think, Trello board's actually a really good idea. And then I can just kind of organize what's going to go where. And then I think it's just about that discipline, making sure that I'm quite strict on not letting the scope grow beyond what I've kind of initially set out for that 2-week iteration. But yeah, definitely it's really, really helpful.
That's it.
Awesome. So that's it. End of the month, we're going to see an app in the App Store, right?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. All right, thank you for joining us then, and see
Absolutely.
you in the next one.
Thank you both so much for having me. See you soon.
Bye, Suhail. Take care.
All right, hello everyone in the chat. Did you like this session? If you did, press the like button.
Hello, everyone.
All right, do we have any questions here? Oh, look at that. You can improve the UI when you update the app incrementally.
That's
Absolutely.
it.
Always do things incrementally with software. Keep your software soft so you can keep incrementing. What about Swift UI? How can we do such tests with Swift UI? Like this. You need to use a framework. For example, there is a framework called View Inspector, where you can actually perform taps on buttons and things like that, extract views from the hierarchy.
Yeah.
If you want to have tests like this with Swift UI, you're going to have to use a framework because you cannot do it natively. Oh, that's it. Islam already gave the answer. Fantastic. And Gordon also saying you can also use snapshot testing. Yes, to check the UI. But to check like tapping on buttons and what happens, maybe you need a framework. Otherwise, you're testing logic with snapshot tests and maybe it breaks because of a change in the font rendering, and you don't want to test failing because of font rendering changed when you're testing logic. So ideally, you want to try to separate logic from the user interface, how it looks, what it does. The snapshot test should only fail if it's testing the user interface changed the rendering. If the logic didn't change, it should not fail. Yeah, also snapshot test can be slow. The snapshot test is much slower than a unit test.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it could be a strategy, if you're starting already with a legacy code base and you have a lot of code, it could be a start to give you some confidence to refactor. Sometimes you have logic inside, like on a peer or some logic with tasks. Yes. And maybe you need a framework for that. Unfortunately, hopefully, Apple will provide us tools in the future.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.